Good morning, members, and welcome to the Scrutiny and Performance Committee meeting today, the 1st of February 2023. My name's Councillor Colin Stewart. I'm the convener of the committee. To my left is Bailey Alistair Bailey, vice convener. To my right, we have Miss Molly, the committee clerk, and on her right, Miss Simpson, the head of legal and governance services. Can I just remind members to keep microphones on mute throughout the meeting unless you're speaking, otherwise it interferes with whoever else is trying to speak. And can I remind you to use the chat box if you're online to attract my attention, and either the chat box or a wave in the room will do. Are there any apologies? I'll ask the clerk to confirm.
Thank you, convener. No, we don't have any apologies this morning. In the chambers today, we have Bailey, Councillor Allen, Carr, Forbes, Massey, Shires, Smith and Stewart. For those online, when I call out your name, could you please confirm you're present? Councillor Drysdale.
Yeah, present, yeah.
Councillor Frampton.
Present.
And Councillor Robertson.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll proceed to item 2 on the agenda. Any declarations of interest? Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda today? Nope. Thank you very much. Item 3. We're provided with the minute of the Scrutiny and Performance Committee of 30th of November for 2022 for approval. Can I ask if the minute can be agreed? Thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda is the outstanding business statement. In respect of item 1 on the outstanding business statement, a briefing session has been arranged as agreed at the last meeting for members in February 2023. I think everybody should have calendar invitations for that. Oh, sorry, point of order. Councillor Forbes.
A really minor point, convener. I just wonder why the officers are now sitting at the back. I find it quite rude with speaking to people when I've got my back to them, and I wonder if there's going to be a technical reason that they're now there rather than to the side.
Thanks, Councillor Forbes. I think my understanding is it because the microphones in the chamber are linked to the positioning of the camera. So for full council, for example, all the microphones on the desks in front are targeted at elected members, and there's only one microphone over here which is targeted and linked. I understand the point that you're making, and it can be a bit awkward to crick your neck round. So we might ask if any adjustments can be made. But thank you. I'm sure they don't think you're rude, Councillor Forbes. Sorry, so we'll return to that was the update on item 1 on the outstanding business statement. Item 2, the forward planner, that is complete. We have that on the agenda today. So can we agree that that completed action can be removed from the business statement? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 3, closing out of improvement actions from business management improvement plans. The update here is that the publication of the local government benchmarking framework dashboard has been delayed until mid-March, at which point officer training will take place, and then we will have that demonstrated for elected members. And item 4, we've got an update that the National Health and Wellbeing Census data will only be published this month, and so a presentation will be delivered to members following that. Can we therefore note the outstanding business statement? Agreed. Thank you very much. So we'll proceed to item 5 on the agenda, which is the forward planner for the committee in terms of reports that we'll receive at our scheduled meetings during the year. Can I ask if the forward planner can be noted? Thank you very much. And for the substantive item of business on the agenda today, the Planning Performance Framework 11 report for the year 21-22. Can I ask Christian Smith, the Head of Service for Planning, to introduce the report?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everyone in the chambers and to those joining us remotely. This report relates to Perth and Ross Council's Planning Performance Framework 11, or PPF 11, which sets out performance statistics, case studies and work of continuous service improvement within our planning related services, all for the period between 1st of April 2021 and 31st of March 2022. The PPF 11 was collated and prepared by officers last summer.
Sorry, could you just try switching your microphone off and on and bringing it a bit closer? I don't think the sound is coming through properly, Mr. Smith.
Is that any better? Okay, thanks. So I'll go back to the beginning of that introduction. This report relates to Perth and Ross Council's Planning Performance Framework 11, or PPF 11, which sets out performance statistics, case studies of work and continuous service improvement work within our planning related services, all for the period between 1st of April 2021 and 31st of March 2022. The PPF 11 was collated and prepared by officers last summer and submitted to the Scottish Government in September, with feedback from the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth, Tom Arthur, being received just before Christmas. On to the performance framework in itself, it's clear that performance of PKC is strong and relates highly when compared with the overall picture across Scotland, even in the application timescale performance marker, where we see a RAG marker of amber. This reflects that the excellent average performance time taken to process householder applications is slightly reduced from the previous year, but remained very good and well above the Scottish average. This amber marker being frustrating as being measured against our own performance, which is excellent, sees continuous improvement of high performance, very difficult to maintain in an upward curve as the small margins remaining available see small fluctuations negatively impact the RAG rating. Moving forward, it's proposed that the next iterations of the Planning Performance Framework will be presented to this committee, and in this vein is asked that members of the committee, following scrutiny of the PPF and ministerial feedback, consider and make suggestions in relation to future case studies and service improvements. If there are any questions, we have a number of officers with us today, including David Littlejohn, Head of Planning and Development and Chief Planning Officer, Brenda Murray, Team Leader within the Local Development Team, and myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you very much for compiling the report, and can also thank officers for making the numerical adjustments in the tables from the draft that was submitted to the Scottish Government. Can I invite members, if there are any questions, to come forward with them? Councillor Allen, you're first.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, officers. I gave forward notice of my question anyway. However, on page 19 of presentation, point 3 suggests that under delivery of self-improvement, we're going to have a project on self and custom built housing. And under the title, What We Have Achieved, it suggests that there will be development of a pilot scheme in Auchterarder. Now, as that's been achieved, I don't know anything about it, so I'd like to visit and understand a bit more about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. Somebody from Mr. Smith.
Yeah, if I could just come in on that one. I'm kind of been made aware of through my colleagues in housing team that that pilot has been delayed. In terms of what's written in the PPF report, that was written, way back in time. So since then, it's been decided to delay that project, and it's going to be looked at in more detail and taken through our big place conversation, which is the early engagement for the next local development plan. So, it will be discussed. It's, the idea is to have more of a discussion around it with the community, and it'll, be given more consideration and thought as to how, and how it could potentially be brought forward. Thank you.
So it hasn't been achieved, and if so, will it be changed in the report?
It hasn't been achieved. As I said, the PPF report was written at a specific point in time, and has been submitted. Things will happen, between the preparation of that document and now, which may, have an impact on some of what is identified in that report.
Thank you. Just if you are going to go ahead and do this, can you keep me involved, please?
Mr. Littlejohn?
Yeah, it's just a point of clarification. As Brenda was saying, that the PPF was written at a point in time, and at that stage, the improvement action was on target, which is still the case in terms of the other actions, which was setting up the working group, doing the policy review, working with the developers, etc. It's just the final stage, and in terms of the actual delivery on ground of the self-build is going to be delayed. So I think it's still accurate to say the overall action is on target, but it's disappointing that we haven't been able to get the delivery moved forward as quickly as we would have liked. I am still confident it's the right thing to do. We are really keen to pursue and support self-build wherever possible.
And I'm sure officers will be happy to keep Councillor Allen involved as well when that moves forward. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I'm interested in the discussions that we have with NHS Tayside about the provision of medical services when we give approval to largish developments. I tried to get somewhere with this at the last planning meeting I was on a week or so back, but I didn't really get anywhere. Can I just ask, is there a policy? Is there a rule that we stick to? Do we ask NHS for their views? If we do we get response from them? And any other information the officers are able to give? Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. And yes, we did discuss that at the last Planning and Placemaking Committee and a number of other committees going back a number of years now. And I think the advice that's been given as we engage with NHS Tayside primarily during the preparation of the local development plan. They are consulted and asked for their views in relation to the various proposed allocations, particularly those of scale, and have the opportunity to feedback at that time and raise any issues with us. And then those issues, if raised with us, would be incorporated into the local development plan. Once a site is allocated within the local development plan, there is then no further opportunity to consult with them because they've already set out their position. And that may well be why there is some uncertainty when applications come forward, are reported to committees or determined otherwise, and there is not a consultation with NHS Tayside because the fact is they have already been consulted and not raised issues in relation to the site such that it can be allocated within the development plan without the requirement for any additional contributions. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Can I just go back to, you said they're consulted, but when they were consulted on LDP2, did we actually get a response from NHS Tayside? And my second question is there an opportunity for us to change that process so that, for example, say a development of more than 20, more than 40, more than 100, the numbers kind of irrelevant at this stage, is there an opportunity for us to then go back to NHS Tayside and ask them again specifically about the availability of medical services in that area?
If I could come in relation to consultation on LDP2 and whether we received a response. We did receive a response in relation to general issues. In relation to specific sites, that was varied across the piece. We, will be engaging with them again for LDP3, and obviously trying to improve on that process and the level and detail of response that we have had in the past. We now have the new national planning framework and the new planning system, which is very much more geared towards early engagement, with all stakeholders involved in that process, and there is an emphasis through that for key agency groups such as NHS to have more commitment towards taking forward and engaging in local development as it moves forward, planning out our strategies more in unison. Thank you.
Thanks. And maybe if I could just follow up with a question. Will we organise as part of the consultation for Local Development Plan 3, LDP 3, will we organise, a particular sit-down workshop with NHS Tayside and actually go through the detail of the plan with them, so that there is infrastructure planning in terms of GP surgeries, dental provision, all of that, matched to where house building is going to occur within Perth and Kinross?
Yeah, I can maybe just give some background as to what has happened in recent years. Obviously, officers are well aware of the concerns of both councillors and communities in relation to health provision across the authority, and we've been engaging with NHS Tayside for a number of years now to try and assist them in engaging more earlier and in more detail in relation to both the local development plan and planning applications, and we've had a number of sessions with them over the last few years, and indeed I was just in conversation in the last weeks with the party at NHS Tayside that is looking at planning applications.
Thanks for that. And my second question was, could we change that? So could we, for example, say that if we're going to be given permission for a certain number of houses, we would encourage or at least try to get some response from NHS Tayside on the medical care provision in that area?
At the moment, if it is an allocated site in the local development plan, we could consult with NHS Tayside informally. However, they have already responded, not identifying any shortfall in provision that they would require to be addressed by that application. So we couldn't require through the planning process any further contributions to be made. So that in effect, we could consult, but they wouldn't really be able to say anything. It would only be sites that have not come through the local development plan process and are of a particular scale.
Okay, thank you very much. Bailey, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It's certainly good to see that we're doing well, both against the baseline of our own previous performance and of other local authorities. So thank you for the report. I think there's a lot of good news in here. One item that I receive a lot of questions about from residents since the COVID times is the policy of not always necessarily carrying out an in-person site visits. That was an area I was interested to read is mentioned here on page 20 of the actual document, or page 42 of the document pack. There's some narrative about the approach to carrying out site visits. I think that's obviously a good thing. That we have now the flexibility. However, I wanted to know specifically, what are the criteria? Are they documented anywhere, the specific criteria for whether a site visit is deemed to be required versus whether a desk survey is deemed to be adequate? Just what are those precise criteria? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question, Bailey. Very careful consideration is given to the need for a site visit, and that's in line with the approach that's published on the Perth and Kinross Council website. Sorry, I'll try and get this in my mouth. So we have a fairly lengthy narrative on how we would consider the requirement for a site visit on the Perth and Kinross Council website. I can certainly provide you with that and a link to it, and it's referenced in the report as well. In effect, a risk-averse approach is taken, and if there is uncertainty over the ability to reasonably consider the context of the site, having taken account of all the available information, which is regularly beyond just photographs, and also using our previous experience and professional expertise, a decision is taken on whether a visit is required. If there's any uncertainty by the individual officer, reassurance or confirmation is taken by their line manager, and importantly there's no legal requirement to undertake a site visit, but as I see this, we do this wherever is necessary, but there are many benefits to not taking the time to visit each and every site, because in a vast majority of cases, and certainly the evidence that we've found through undertaking this approach, is that there are huge efficiencies on all fronts to be taken, as well as the sustainability of it by not travelling to all corners of the authority when that's not necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I have that document in front of me, and I appreciate it does explain how your approach and the level of diligence that goes in. However, what residents and what I'm asking for is a bit of detail on what the precise criteria are, how that decision is reached. Is that something we can maybe have as a follow-up, some more detail on the actual decision-making criteria?
In effect, it's a judgment. There are, as you see from the report, 2,000 or so different types of application, and the scenario in relation to each is often different. Each is considered on its merits, and equally the decision is taken in relation to the information available, which can vary across applications. And we've had many positive comments on the way in which we're undertaking the visits at the minute.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now.
Perhaps I could just follow up with a question. If the exercise, if the application is assessed without a site visit, and we're using online techniques such as looking at Ordnance Survey or Street View, those tools are not necessarily up to date. Certainly, I'm aware of a case I think that went to local review body where the Street View information was not up to date in terms of the layout of buildings surrounding the applicant site. So how do we make sure that there's no lag in the tools that we're using from what would actually be seen if you were doing a site visit?
As I say, there are a multitude of different pieces of information available to us, but we use judgment, and if there is any uncertainty, then we will look at it in more detail. We may request more information, or in many occasions we will visit the site. Maybe just point out, it's not the case that we are not visiting many sites.
Thank you. We'll go online now to Councillor Robertson, please.
Bailey's just asked the question I was wanting to ask, and your supplementary was very helpful as well, Convener. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robertson. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. Councillor Shires will come to you now, back in the chamber.
Thank you, Convener. One of the I actually found the report really interesting. I quite liked the layout of it, and it was really sort of readable and interesting. In the preamble to the report 4.2, it talks about the challenges in terms of staffing and recruitment. And just a bit of information about what's been done nationally about this and what's been done locally, what the barriers are to recruiting staff and retention of staff, and recognising that they are the essential asset within that department.
Thank you, Mr. Littlejohn.
Yeah, the there's a variety of kind of contexts for this. I mean, nationally, there is a shortage of qualified planners in Scotland. Last year, one of the 2 remaining planning schools at Heriot Watt closed. So the only university that's currently training planners is Dundee. So at the national level, there is a piece of work being done by the Scottish Government, the Royal Town Planning Institute and Heads of Planning Scotland to look at extending the provision. And they're in discussions at the moment with a number of institutions about how that can be done, both conventional in phase 4-year degrees, expanding the 2-year postgraduate provision, and also some digital online training, which would benefit those in work but not yet qualified. So that piece of work called Future Planners is underway nationally. I think actually really interestingly, and based on experience from building standards, which has introduced a modern apprentice scheme, and we were one of the first authorities to take advantage of that and have currently 2 modern apprentices in building standards. An MA for planning is now also in development, arguably much more complex. And it's taken a bit of time with the universities and colleges that are currently engaged in that discussion. But it's hoped that an MA will launch later this year or next year. There's also been some interesting work done with senior pupils, S5 and S6, in some pilot areas to understand why more young people are not interested in planning. It might be obvious in terms of development management, it's a tough job, but in terms of the wider climate change and placemaking agenda, there are probably stronger hooks with young people. So, for example, Fife Council has just produced for the rest of us a video targeted at S5 and S6 students to encourage them to think about planning as a career. The Highland Council has done some work with the Scottish Society of Geography teachers. Geography is a traditional entry route into planning, and that's starting to prove dividends. But it's clear that we will want to do more locally as well, engaging with head teachers and schools to try and persuade younger people that planning is a career. We've also successfully and historically encouraged some of our technicians to move into planning, and I think there are 3 or 4 colleagues who have come through that technician route. We also need to attract and retain technicians, so there is a kind of double-edged sword, if you like, in that respect. And finally, we've had really strong support for graduates into planning. We currently have 3 graduates working in planning and development, 2 of whom have already successfully moved into permanent positions. 1 we're hoping we can find a vacancy for. So between the combination of working with schools, working with MAs, encouraging graduates and giving graduate opportunities within the council, training our own staff, and then the emerging kind of online digital training, I think we're moving to a place where we can hopefully attract more folks into the world of planning.
Okay, thank you. Did you have? I thought you were multiple questions, Councillor Shires. Okay, right, we'll take it in turn then. So next is Councillor Massey.
What's that? Thank you for the report. My question is on a little bit of a bugbear of mine. Section 75 is an important part of the planning process. Trying to find the Section 75 online is nigh near impossible, and I noticed in the report it's on in progress. Can you give me an update on how that progress is progressing?
Mr. Smith.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Massey. I think in relation to Section 75s and being on the website, they should be published as part of the pack of documents once they are concluded. But I think as you understand, Section 75 and legal agreements can take a number of months, if not years, to conclude before they are signed, sealed, delivered and registered and then able to be publicly made available. But if there are any particular Section 75s that are not available to you publicly, I'm happy to help you on that. In relation to the matters within the planning performance framework, I think that is recognising that there is improvement that requires to be done in terms of the timelines from whether it be the council under delegation or through committees being minded to grant an application subject to a Section 75 legal agreement and the amount of time that that then takes. However, there are a number of parties involved in that, not just the council, and we are certainly trying to press matters such that as quick conclusions as possible can be undertaken, but unfortunately it's not all in our hands. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm swithering now whether to come to Councillor Allen's second question or Councillor Drysdale's first. Let's go back online. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, convener, and apologies for keeping my camera off. I wanted to return to the subject matter raised by Councillor Forbes in terms of the consultations with NHS Tayside, which is obviously a very important component of consideration of housing applications. I understand what Mr. Smith and others have said already, and all I'm keen to do is try and learn lessons and try and improve how this is done going forward, because it strikes me that the consultation, if NHS Tayside responded to the consultation at the initial stage of the LDP2 consideration, that would have been in 2015, and we're in 2023. That's 8 years, and an awful lot of water has flowed under the bridge in these intervening years, changing the level of healthcare provision across the area. And I'm wondering, I'm picking up that there are very seldom, if any, specific site responses. So we need to get better at this, in my opinion, and I'm wondering whether this is the same picture across the rest of Scotland, whether officers are aware whether NHS Tayside is an outlier or whether this is a common problem. And if it is a common problem, what can we feasibly do through Scottish Government as required to ensure that we have meaningful responses going forward to planning applications where housing developments our major housing developments are being considered, and we need to be comfortable that the healthcare provision is what it should be. Thanks.
Mr. Littlejohn, I think there's two questions there.
Yeah, firstly on the kind of national piece, this is not unique to Perth and Kinross or indeed Tayside. It's been recognised for some time across the country, and it's not necessarily just in relation to the NHS. There are a number of national agencies that over the piece have tended not to meaningfully engage with the development plan process at the right point in time, which is plan formulation, and then have a clear view as to what the implications of their consultation responses are when individual planning applications come through. So that point has been raised with the high level group on planning, which the planning minister, currently Tom Arthur, chairs, and is raised with the kind of key agencies group on a regular basis by Scottish Government colleagues. My sense is in the the 10 or so years that I've been here, it has improved and it's got better. NHS Tayside, I think, are in a better place now in understanding the implications of not engaging at an early enough point in time than they were previously. So it's an improving position. We entered into a protocol with them a number of years ago that clearly set out for their benefit, largely, how we would engage, when we would engage, and what we would expect from them in return. We can't force them, clearly. All we can do is have a proper grown-up conversation about the importance of all of this, and it's a point we've made on a number of occasions. I think the protocol has helped. The levels of engagement are improving, and I think we will do everything we can to make sure that engagement is much more meaningful in relation to LDP 3.
Okay.
I wonder,
thanks
Convener, if I might just quickly follow up.
I was about to invite you to Councillor Drysdale. I was going to thank Mr. Littlejohn for his answer first, and given that it has been the subject of interest from quite a few members, I think that protocol on the engagement, if that could be circulated to committee members, that would be helpful. Councillor Drysdale, back to you.
Thank you, Convener, and also thanks to Mr. Littlejohn for his response. I just wondered if just so that we can get a better understanding of the level and degree of response that has been received in relation to LDP2, whether the broad response from NHS Tayside to LDP2 and any subsequent responses to specific planning applications since 2015, if these could be shared with committee members.
Is that Mrs.
So
Murray
a request, a request, yes.
Yeah, I can certainly look into our records to find the information in relation to the LDP. Maybe Christian can respond on the application side.
I think, as I've indicated previously, that the vast majority of the applications or the developments that are of interest to members have not seen a requirement to consult with NHS Tayside for the reasons that I set out previously, that they were already consulted via LDP2 and were not able to go back and ask them for a view when that has already been settled. But there has been, I think, 1 or 2 times that we have been requested to consult with them, and we could try and recall which ones they were, but those were situations, as I outlined earlier, that we weren't able to take into account any comments that they may have made anyway because the time had already passed.
Thank you. I mean, if it can be done on the best endeavours basis, I'd be happy with that. But the main thing is the response to the main consultation in 2015. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we'll add that to the action list. The clerk is furiously noting that one down. So next is back to Councillor Allen for your second question.
Thank you, Convener. It's really a follow-on from Bailey's question, and it was about site visits. And I'm conscious that we are probably still restricting visits. That is the biggest bane of the planning authority in my area, because all the complaints I get are about decisions that have been taken where there has been no site visit. I'm just wondering what the balance is between how we visited prior to the COVID pandemic, and if we're using that as a reason to go into other areas, such as taking photographic evidence. I see from page 20 you're talking about a general risk-based approach to determining the value to be added by undertaking a site visit. But if not taking a site visit leads to so many complaints, is this not something we should be reviewing? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And maybe first of all, there is no restriction on undertaking a site visit. Absolutely no restriction. If that is considered to be necessary, a site visit will be undertaken in line with the risk-based assessment we have. I'm happy to discuss with you any complaints you've had about the lack of a site visit, and we can discuss whether or not that had any variation in outcome. We have had, I think, over the last 3 years, 2 complaints in relation to a site visit not being undertaken, and a review of those situations has found that there would be no difference to the outcome. Obviously, the individuals were unhappy with the decision taken, but whether or not there had been a site visit doesn't appear to have affected that decision in any way whatsoever. So I'd maybe offer up that we can have a conversation about any concerns that you have, and we can perhaps discuss that in detail.
Thank you. I appreciate that response, and yes, I'll take you up on that. The one thing I will add, though, is that you may not get many complaints. That's because we deal with some of them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Allen. Next is Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. I appreciate that the vast number of planning applications come in, get dealt with properly and appropriately, and then go out the door and everyone moves on. Unfortunately, the ones that we get involved in are when things don't go the way that the public want them to go. And I want to say, I don't mean when we've rejected an application, although, you know, that obviously happens too. But I want to just go back to the question about staff numbers. And I wonder if there is a turnover of staff, because anecdotally we hear about planning officers that come here, work for a little while and then get paid a load more money to go off to the private sector. Is that a really big problem? And if we adopt the attitude of growing our own, is there a risk that we'll train people up, get them the qualifications, and they'll move on for a bit more money in the private sector?
We had a very long period of stability where there was very little change, particularly in development management. But I think over the past year or so, probably more than half of the development managed officers have left and had to be replaced. Now, there are a range of reasons why people leave. In most cases, it's money. It's all about the money. But in some cases, it's about the ability to do a promoted post without necessarily moving home. Hybrid working, again, we've benefited from, but we've also lost from the sense that people can take up opportunities elsewhere without physically having to commute on a daily basis. But in most cases, it comes back to the starting point of the previous question. There's a national shortage of planning officers, and therefore some organisations, particularly the private sector, are in a position to offer enhanced salaries that we can't compete with. And understandably, particularly in a cost of living crisis, people will literally vote with their feet, and I think that's the answer. We have filled pretty much all of the vacant posts. It's been an enormously stressful period of time for colleagues to get us back to where we need to be, and that has impacted on performance. But we're in a good place now, and you know, as a local authority employer, we're doing more to try and explain the wider benefits of working for the council. It's not just about salary, it's all of the other benefits that go with it. So selling ourselves better is something that we're looking at collectively. But in terms of planning, in a good place now. Pretty much all the posts have been filled apart from one, which is just a recent announcement of a move. So hopefully we will retain the staff that we have now.
Thanks for that, David. I appreciate the issues that you've got, and the issue that I raised in my second point about, is there anything at all, I think I probably know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Is there anything we can do to try and stop people that we train up, give them the qualifications, then just moving on? I mean, I take it there's nothing contractually we can do, but the stuff that you mentioned about wider benefits of working for an authority, could you maybe just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing we can do to make people stay. If we funded someone's, or part funded a degree, certainly there is a clawback condition within a period of time that if they can get that qualification and immediately leave, we would seek to recover some of the costs of the course. But in most cases, training is on the job. It's a time investment of other colleagues, and there's nothing we can really do about that. Your other point of the question, I've just suddenly forgotten. No, how could I forget those? I think particularly with younger members of staff, it's more difficult to help them understand the kind of longer term. But you know, a career average pension is much more attractive than many will get in the private sector. The sick pay entitlements, childcare vouchers if appropriate, access to the car lease scheme, and the quality of life in Perth and Kinross. All of these things together are potentially sometimes forgotten if we just look at the top line salary, annual leave, flexible working. All of these are all benefits which I think together make a package, and I guess it's selling the package rather than just the bottom line salary. But ultimately, at different stages of one's life, people will make a choice what's the most important, whether it's pension or whether it's salary.
Thank you, Councillor Shars.
Mr. Littlejohn missed the working with wonderful elected members out of that list of benefits. I'm sure that was just a slip, David. Looking at the case studies, obviously one jumped out at me, the Rattree Active Travel Plan, which was a really good piece of work that was done within the community. And in a number of the case studies, it refers to that community engagement and working with communities. And I wondered if there are plans to expand the work that's done with particularly community councils, but increasingly bodies like development trusts and other voices within local communities, because I still feel there is that disconnect between of an understanding about the planning process, how communities and individuals can feed into it, and how the planning department then can feed back to communities as LDPs, etc. develop. So it was just an understanding about any pieces of work that are planned, and how we can support that work.
Thank you, Councillor. If I could speak to that in terms of the big place conversation, which I mentioned earlier, and the work that we're doing on early engagement on LDP3. In gearing up for that, we have been reaching out to the community councils, community development trusts, lots of different community groups and organisations, hard to reach groups, schools, young people, to inform them of or engage with them on what we are proposing to do through that big place conversation, with the various groups. We've put out information advising of events that we'll be having, more specifically in Perth at the moment, because that's the first area that we're focusing on between now and the end of March. So we've been making communities aware of that, holding drop-in events, awareness sessions, and we will extend that out as we move across the community. So it's very much been a case of trying to find out who all the groups are and reach out to them. So we've been doing that kind of across service. So our community learning and development team have given us a lot of information around that, so that we can build a picture and make links with the various groups. In addition to that, we've been trying to engage and encourage these groups to perhaps hold their own community events to gather information and evidence from the communities about what they do and don't like about their areas, so to feed into that process. We also have the new requirement in relation to local place plans, which through the big place conversation, we'll be raising awareness of that as well, and we have information up on the website to help any communities that are potentially thinking of preparing a local place plan, to give them information and guidance around how they can look to take that forward. I hope that gives a little bit more information.
That's really helpful, Brenda. I think possibly a little bit focus on the statutory role that community councils in particular take in terms of commenting on planning applications, and perhaps not a full understanding of their role and the importance of their role in providing that voice for their communities. Would be really helpful to know what more we can do to bolster that.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. As you'll appreciate, we're more than happy to provide advice and training to community councils, and have done so on many occasions, some more than others, and oftentimes day and daily. Unfortunately, this is not always improving relationships, which are really important, but we are trying hard. The role of community councils is to make representations on planning applications on behalf of their communities, and as members will be aware, in terms of decision making, recent revisions to the delegated powers see any applications which a community council would object to now requiring to be referred to the Planning and Placemaking Committee for a decision, and indeed there are 3 applications programmed to be presented to the February committee, which would have previously have been dealt with under delegated powers.
Thanks. I wonder if I could just follow up Councillor Shires' question with a supplementary. In terms of the, and I think, you know, certainly in terms of the training and engagement with community councils that Mr. Smith was talking about, and the big place conversation that Mrs. Murray was talking about, both very much to be welcomed. My experience, I think, is that certainly as I have been going around talking to community groups about LDP3, I've been very much in telling them that this is the stage to get involved in order to shape the next local development plan. But I wonder if the staff that will be coming along to the big place conversations will be the sort of development plan staff, I assume, rather than necessarily Mr. Smith's planning officers who actually look at planning applications. I wonder whether it would be useful for some of the planning officers to attend at least some of the meetings in order to find out the sorts of issues that there are in areas that the communities can provide advice on, rather than the, you know, us providing the advice and training to them, so that there's a sort of listening process directly from the planning officers who actually make determinations on applications, rather than just on a discussion between communities and the development plan staff.
Yeah, I think you know, that is something that we can look to do. I think in the main, I suppose, you know, the availability of staff, you know, on the development planning side is greater. So that's why, you know, we would have to focus on development plan team staff. But I would point out that it won't all be just planning. We are engaging colleagues further across the council, you know, in the process as well. So when we have our workshop events, we will have colleagues there from, say, perhaps Green Space, you know, who can pick up on some of the issues raised, and you know, feedback more positively in terms of conversation. But I can certainly reach out to Christian and his staff to, you know, seek involvement from them.
And Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I mean, it is the case that, you know, previous iterations of the development plan or supplementary guidance preparation and going forward, the big place conversation and preparation of LDP3 will see my staff involved within communities. Equally, you know, just to give full disclosure, I've attended a number of community councils, and again, it is that two-way conversation. You know, any training that we have provided as well, you know, we're happy to receive questions and explain how the system works, because I think that's where confusion is occurring, the understanding of the detail of how things work, and I think we've spoken through today, for example, the role and times for engagement with NHS Tayside. It takes that conversation and trying putting that into lay terms is often helpful.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. I mean, I think that's really helpful. You know, certainly that engagement. I think the point I was making was it's not necessarily just about the council explaining the process to community councils. It's about actually gaining that local experience, which, you know, a planner who's covering major applications across the whole of Perth and Kinross can't know the details of every individual site. So it was listening to communities in that respect. Thank you. We'll come to Councillor Massey for another question.
Thank you, Convener. With the NPF 4 being published on the 13th of February this month, are there any plans to hold a members' briefing on the impact of the NPF 4 for planning and the LDP 3?
Mr. Littlejohn.
Sorry, excuse me. Yes, in a nutshell, there are, as part of actually a wider series of ongoing briefings on various aspects of planning, whether it's, you know, development viability, the new LDP process, but actually one of the first would be NPF 4.
Thank you. And Vice Convener.
Thank you. Various places in the report mentioned the council's increased reliance on digital technologies, which is a good move. However, I observed that it's still quite tricky for a person commenting on a planning application to add images. They can, of course, find the email address and attach them. I've heard cases where the attachments have been missed when those have been transferred. At the very least, it requires double handling. Have we petitioned our software provider to see if they're able to facilitate image upload just in with the comment, like when someone's reporting a pothole, it's possible to upload the image at source there? Thank you.
Yes, we've looked at that. I think that the difficulty is then publishing that on the website. But, you know, we receive these images and we consider those images. We don't require to, and it's very difficult for us to also publish them on the website. But I'm not aware of not receiving images. So it's maybe the back of house complexities that are not seeing these published on the website, but we are considering all information submitted.
I'd imagine that's what it is, that maybe people feel when they've attached an image to an email and then the text appears on the public website, but not the image. They may be imagining you've not seen it, but that's reassuring, you know, to know you have. Thank you.
If I could just kind of add something to that, there's actually a new system in development. So within about 3 years, the current uniform system will be replaced by a national cloud-based system, which will be much more flexible, much more user-friendly, both for planning and building standards and payment of fees. But actually, importantly, that kind of user interface in terms of uploading information will be much improved. But it is, you know, I should stress it's probably about 3 years away, but it is recognised that there is a limitation with the current system, which is now quite elderly, but a work in progress.
Councillor Allen, I think you're the last remaining person with a question.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to all officers. In reflecting my colleague, Councillor Shires, I enjoyed the report. It was easy to read. Unfortunately, as a consequence of that, it's also easy to pick out a few questions. I'm very supportive of what you do. Whether that comes across or not, I am. And I would also like to take the opportunity to ask for a bit further training. Haven't had any training on planning. I would appreciate that. Throughout the report, it says overall performance is above Scottish average. Is that considered to be acceptable, or do we strive to do better? And in fact, I don't need an answer to that. What I really want is to give you a challenge. Can we actually aim to be the benchmark? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's quite clear in the report as well that we do perform well against the Scottish average. You know, there are no league tables as such. That used to be the case, but what we are now tasked with doing, and maybe that came across in what I was saying, is looking at year-on-year improvement. The difficulty that we have against a number of the markers that we have, that our level of performance is so high that the margins are very marginal at the top. So if you look into some of the detail, and again, I'm happy to have a discussion, and we do offer training as well, and that would have been available to you, I think, on your election as well. But we're talking about very, very high performance again in certain categories, whereas a 0.2 or 0.3 change year on year is very small. But if it's in a downward direction, going from doing it very, very fast to just very fast, that's where the RAG is affecting us. But I would say that we are in the top, and I don't want to put a number on it, but the top few authorities in the country overall.
Thank you.
Thanks, and maybe I'll indulge myself with another quick follow-up to that. In terms of performance, we're measuring throughput through the system. I don't recall, I would need to go back and look, but at one of the recent meetings of the committee, we work, and we did touch on it earlier. One of the recent meetings of the committee, we were talking about the council's annual complaints performance report. There's nothing in the PPF which sort of actually considers the number of complaints received. I mean, you touched on, Mr. Smith, the couple of complaints about site visits, but how do we sort of distill the information from other sources into this as an improvement?
We can add anything into the PPF that we like. It's our PPF. The Scottish Government's interested in the national performance indicators, but beyond that, it's our document to help us improve our performance. So if that would be useful to members, we can add it in. I'm reluctant to add too many measures in that are not easily measurable, but that is one that we do hold data on, so it should be possible to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. Last call for questions. Councillor Forbes, you've sneaked in with one there. So while Councillor Forbes is asking if anybody else has got any, just pop them in the chat very quickly.
Thanks, Convener. I noticed in the letter that came from the Minister as a response to this report, there was reference to the cost recovery. Would it be possible just to get a kind of idiot's guide, a brief overview to how the cost recovery works for planning applications?
The joint aspiration of heads of planning, of the RTPI, of Scottish Government is that the full cost of running the development management system, which is a part of the overall planning system, is fully recovered through fees. The most recent fee increases have made a significant contribution, but it's not quite there yet. There's still a gap. And it's a gap that's, I suppose, unequal across the country. For authorities that have a greater number of, for example, major applications, their proportionate fee income is going to be higher than those authorities that are processing lots and lots and lots of smaller householder applications. So there's still a gap, but it is much narrowed. And of course, the flip side of that is the expectation, and we are kind of doing that, of reinvesting a proportion of that fee income back into the service to deliver for customers. So the aspiration is still there, but it's probably another couple of years away, mindful of recession, mindful of construction inflation, mindful of the impact on industry. At last week's kind of annual conference with ministers and heads of planning, I think the sense is we're still 2 or 3 years away from probably doing any further changes to planning fees.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. Right, thank you very much to members for their questions. Thank you especially to officers for being here and providing the comprehensive answers and the commitments that we've given to follow up on a couple of points. We'll now move to comments We are invited at the start of the report to have scrutinised the planning performance framework, to have scrutinised the ministerial feedback received. So thanks to Councillor Forbes for that final question, which ticked that box, and to consider and make suggestions in relation to case studies and service improvements to be included in the next planning performance framework, which will be version 12. Can I invite any comments from members, things that they would like to see in relation to case studies or service improvements, performance measures, anything like that? Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. This isn't a comment, just a response to your request there, and I wonder if we could see some case studies of when things don't go to plan, because I'm sure that does happen. I mean, it's a large organisation, and I wouldn't blame anybody for getting things wrong, but if we don't know about them, we can't look at them.
Thanks very much, Councillor Forbes. It's certainly one of my, and it doesn't matter which report I'm looking at, it's certainly one of my sort of repeated questions is, if people are writing a report and putting case studies in, we'll put case studies which demonstrate good performance, but conversely, it's also useful, especially for elected members, scrutinising any aspect of service performance to see the converse and what improvements have been made where there's been a concern or a problem, as opposed to the spreading of good practice. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. Absolutely agree with that. I think that would be very helpful. I just wanted to make a comment observation about the report in relation, and it comes back to my comment about elected members working with officers, and it's regarding the planning enforcement. And it's if officers could take this as feedback, that my experience as a ward member has been dramatically improved in relation to the planning enforcement officers, and very grateful for the work that they've done. But it's about the way that they take the issue that you raised with them, communicate with you on what actions are being taken, and then bring it to a conclusion. And that has changed in my experience, and it's very positive. And I think it's that kind of experience that is helpful in continuous improvement. It also makes it a lot easier for those of us who then go and have the, at community councils or wherever these matters are then raised, to have like a timeline of how a case has been dealt with, and it just builds confidence in the whole system.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forbes, a general comment?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I said earlier that there's no doubt the vast majority, excuse me, of planning applications come in, get processed, get dealt with, and go out the door, and the world continues to move on, and nobody really notices that. Sadly, the ones that we get notified of are when things have gone wrong. I think the duty is on us as elected members is to differentiate between the people who are complaining about the decision that's been made and those who genuinely have an issue about the process that's been followed. And I know that it's hard to do that sometimes when you've got angry constituents on the phone. I'd like to think I certainly try to do that when I can. I do have a real bugbear with this medical issue. Something that really bothers me. I get complaints regularly about people with poor access to healthcare, and those complaints increase when there's any talk of a major development. And I'm satisfied to a large degree by what I've heard, but I do think we need to have more discussion with NHS Tayside, not just at LDP stage, because that could go on for years, as was said. So just really thanks for the report. Thanks for the opportunity to scrutinise this. I've not been on scrutiny for long, so I'm not sure what level of scrutiny planning has come under in years gone by. I suspect it's not very much, and I'd certainly like to see us digging a little bit deeper into some individual areas of planning over the longer period. Thanks, Convener.
And Vice Convener.
Sorry, I forgot. I was at the top table for this one. So I was going to just add a comment. It's great to hear that we're in the top few local authorities on planning performance. It must be very challenging to always have to be expected to exceed our own past performance, given limited resources and in spite of us already being in the leading pack nationally. So thank you for all the effort that goes in. Just some closing remarks on the topic of site visits. While I appreciate that appropriate diligence goes into the consideration of whether a site visit is needed or not in every case, I do think it's incumbent on us to publish those criteria that we use to reach that decision. I agree that for some cases, a desk-based survey will be more than sufficient and can enable us to determine applications more efficiently. On the other hand, there will be cases where it wouldn't be appropriate. A two-dimensional image, as is offered on Google Street View, gives us a general idea of the layout of a location, but lacks in perspective in the most literal sense of that term. What I believe we should do in the interests of transparency is share the detail precisely where we're drawing that line between what needs an in-person visit versus what doesn't. And so I wondered perhaps, convener, we could log this as a potential future service improvement to improve the transparency around that decision that we're making about applications. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Robertson online.
Thank you, convener. I thought this was a very, very good report, and I found it very easy to read and to follow. But in my closing comment, I would just like to agree with the comments made by Councillor Forbes. I really do think that we should insist that NHS Tayside gets involved in the discussions when we're looking at housing sites throughout Perth and Kinross. My understanding, speaking to health professionals locally, is that they're never consulted. And what happens, especially in areas where there's been rapid house building, it becomes very, very difficult for people actually to get appointments to see a doctor. It becomes very, very hard to find a dentist who'll take you on. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's not joined up planning. And we really need, if we're increasing the population in areas, we have to insist that we build the infrastructure in to support these growing populations. And I'd add to that the need to put in road and education infrastructure too, because we've suddenly found that we've had a large housing development, and that leads to a huge increase in traffic numbers, which puts pressure on our own roads department to try and come up with solutions, which often, and the developer has walked away with the profit and never actually had to put their hands in their pockets to help deal with that. So let's have more joined up planning and not just request it. I think we really need to insist on it. But I think the report all in all is good news for the council that the planning department is working as well as it is, especially during the previous difficulties with the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robertson. And I mean, obviously, members have expressed that as a very clearly, I think, today through the questions as an area to take forward. And Mr. Littlejohn did say that we had a protocol for engagement and that would be circulated. I think possibly reflecting on what you said, maybe part of what we could reflect on is that we maybe engage at a high level with NHS Tayside rather than the local surgeries and providers, and it might be useful to bring them into the conversation as well. Perhaps at the big place conversation would be an opportunity, at least to make those invitations to the local providers, particularly for GPs and dental services. And I think as well, although you mentioned the areas of growing population, Councillor Robertson, I think also we have to be cognizant of the ageing demographic generally of Perth and Kinross, and that will put that will compound the issue that you were I think highlighting. I don't see any other comments. Last opportunity if anybody wants to wave a hand. Oh, okay, maybe if I could just summarise then. I think the areas that members have brought out that we would like to see, and I'm sure all members would like to see the next version of PPF, which will be PPF 12, come back to committee. I think we'd like to see the development of the case studies issue, good and bad case studies. would like to see a bit more detail on the enforcement issues. We could bring in some of the complaints issues, which is data that we already have. I think we would like to see a lot of I think we'd like to see detail of the progress that's been made on LDP engagement, probably generally, maybe with a specific target around the infrastructure, particularly health issues, and the point that the Vice Convener made about the criteria on site visits. With that, can I, with those recommendations, can I invite the committee to agree the report? Thank you very much. So the report is agreed. We've got those recommendations. Hopefully officers will be able to take those forward. I'd like to thank elected members for their attendance today, and I'd like to thank all officers, committee services, but particularly staff from communities in the planning department for their attendance and for their ability to answer the questions and the commitments to follow up afterwards. So thank you very much all. The meeting is concluded.